Welcome to Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and just like any time, man, we have another amazing guest today. Man, we're going to talk to law enforcement. We have our guest, Patrick O'Donnell. He is going to share with us his amazing career with law enforcement, but also he has an amazing website. We have a lot of his books that he's published, copsandwriters.com. We're going to learn everything about just what he has been able to do for his community. And once again, I want to say thank you to our special guest, retired City of Milwaukee Police Sergeant Patrick O'Donnell. Sir, thank you for your time. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
I appreciate your time. So for our audience, if you can start out with what it was like being in the force, and what was your career like, and how did that help you set up with what you're doing today?
You know, I know it sounds cliche, but it was probably one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. It was, without a doubt. You could be of service to the community. That's number one. You actually made a difference. And again, that might sound corny or whatever, but most of the time when the people call the police, it's not their best day. Things are really bad. So if you can turn that around or make it a little more palatable, then I felt like we did our job right. And I wound up in Milwaukee. I was born in Chicago and I spent up until I was about 14, 15. Then we moved to Wisconsin, my whole family. So my heart is always down there. I'm a Bears fan, very frustrated Bears fan, but it ain't easy. Walter Payton was my childhood hero. Yeah, that's how I grew up. And then I wound up in Wisconsin, went to college here, and I went to Milwaukee for the job. That was in 1995. And I really didn't know Milwaukee that well at all, but it reminded me of a smaller version of Chicago. So I loved that. I like the urban environment. And when I got out of the police academy, it was a 6-month academy, very military-ish. You're running around saluting everything but the fire extinguisher. Maybe you salute that too, who knows? But it prepares you for the street. And I was sent to one of the most busiest districts, if not the busiest district in the city, and probably one of the most violent districts in the country. So as a brand new cop, I was a little bit older. I was 30 years old when I got on. I was on the waiting list for 4 years. Back then, competition to be a police officer was a lot of people wanted to be cops. There was a whole lot of competition. When I took the written test, there was about, 2,500 to 3,000 people for maybe 400 jobs. So, a lot of people wanted that job. It's great benefits. There was, a pension. There was a lot of attractive things towards it. And I got on and, they sent me to this district and I really didn't know where I was. I didn't know Milwaukee that well at all. I just knew where Summerfest was. That's like one of the biggest musical festivals in the country. It's great. If you ever have a chance to go, I highly recommend it. And we have all the ethnic festivals too. I love Irish Fest, obviously with a name like Patrick O'Donnell, that's common. But I wound up, like I said before, in one of the most violent districts in the city, if not the country. We're always like in the top 10, unfortunately, of, like shootings and homicides and all that kind of stuff. And they put me midnight to 8 at first. And it was baptism by fire. There was normally a shooting almost every night. And, you took care of other things too. And then eventually I wound up promoting to sergeant after about 6, 7 years on the job. I worked nights for 17 years of my career. And I spent my entire career on the street. So as a sergeant, I was in charge of my guys. I call them my guys, it was the cops that I was in charge of on the street. So I was making sure they were doing their job correctly. And there were certain calls that I was obligated to go to. I had to go to, say, a shooting, a dead body, a robbery, a sexual assault, a child abuse, all these like very high profile things. And, it kept me, super busy. And then after 17 years of working nights, I went day shift. So that was a different bird. Then all of a sudden now I'm handling bank robberies. Never had a bank robbery before. They were fairly common. I was very shocked by that. And other crimes that really didn't happen at night. And the great thing about working during the day was if somebody was running away from you, you could actually see them. At nighttime, it's a challenge. You got a flashlight in one hand and your radio in the other, and you're like, okay, this kind of sucks. And the danger quotient is there as well. So I did enjoy at first. I hated day shift. I didn't want to be on day shift. I couldn't sleep. I was a train wreck. The only reason I went days is because of a very nasty divorce and I wanted my kids, 50-50. So I had to go day shift. Otherwise, I would have retired at nights. I loved working nights. But so be it. I wound up on day shift, but I stayed in patrol, moved around to a couple of different district stations, and that's where I finished my career, was on day shift on the street. So I spent the entirety of my career working on the streets. And when retirement was looming over the horizon, I'll tell you right now that, being a cop is a young guy's game. It ain't an old guy's game. Pushing around in a squad car for 25 years is a young guy's thing. I was 55 when I retired, but I had the luxury of knowing, hey, you hit 25 years, you can retire with a full pension. So that's what you do. But I had a long list of things that I was like, that I don't want to do. And I was like, well, what am I going to do? It's like, okay, it's kind of it's your identity, I guess is the best way to put it. Whenever you go to a party, your neighbors, everyone knows you as, yeah, that's Pat the cop, but one day you turn in all your stuff. Now you're Pat the citizen, you're no longer a cop. So some people have a hard time with that. And, you need to, make a living still and all that. You have a pension, but it's not like what you were making before. So I'm a huge fan of the phrase, dig the well before you're thirsty. And what I did was, after I had about 20 years on, I'm like, what am I going to do? Not sure.
Yeah.
So before I was a cop and after I went to college, I did a bunch of different jobs. And one of them was selling cars. I sold cars, I bartended, anything I could do to pay the rent. And I helped a lot of people buy cars after that. But the great thing about being a car salesman, which is a very tough job, was 100% commission. The great thing was you learned how to talk to people, which was key as a cop. That's 95% of your job is talking to people. It's, and you're going to steer the course of that conversation, and things are either going to go south or they're going to go real well. I mean, I arrested a lot of people, and, I always thought that I did my job right, or my cops did their job right, if they were thanking me, or they're thanking, hey, thanks a lot, man. As you're putting the handcuffs on, it's like, that's one thing that TV really gets wrong, or movies, it's always so confrontational. It doesn't have to be. Sometimes, yes, it is. But a lot of times I'm like, hey, you know what? You got some old business you got to take care of, man. So you know what? We're going to do this tonight. You'll be out tomorrow. All right, cool. And, on the way to the station, I'd be like, hey, you know what? What radio station you want to listen to? This is back when we listened to radio. And, and the guys just kind of like looking at me, and it's like, if they were cool with me, I was cool with them. It's a two-way street. But that really prepped me. And the second thing was, okay, I helped a lot of people buy cars through the years because I was at the other side of the desk. And this is about the time that self-publishing started to kick off. With Amazon, you could submit a manuscript, a cover, etc., and make an ebook. And back then, it wasn't the paperback, but it is now as well, and hardback. But back then, it was just the ebooks for the Kindle. And somebody said, you should really write a book. And I'm like, that's kind of a good idea. And, still, I was trying to dig that well before I was thirsty. I'm like, okay, maybe that's a good idea. So it was a glorified PDF. It was nothing great. I did it under a pen name, so my boss wouldn't know about it, because every off-duty employment, you have to write this report. They have to approve it. It takes forever. I'm like, I'm not jicky-jacking around with any of that stuff. It's like, I'm just going to go under the radar with a pen name. So I did. And, it didn't catch on fire, but yeah, it sold some copies. And I was thinking to myself, this is interesting. So I started going to writers' conferences. And, now I'm getting closer to retirement and I'm starting to get to know people that are a lot better at it than I am. So what happened was, inevitably at these conferences, if you do go to any kind of conference like that, the magic happens out of the classroom. I mean, yeah, there's some nuts and bolts, that you can learn. They have like little seminars or whatever, but the cocktail hour, the mixer, the whatever, that's when you can do some serious networking. That's when, like I said before, that's where I think the magic happens. And people were coming up to me and saying, "Oh, you're that cop guy, right?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm not advertising it. I don't have a sandwich board. I mean, I didn't really want people to know, but it just happens organically." And they're like, and they were super nice and they were super respectful. They're like, "Hey, thanks a lot." And it's like, "Hey, would you need a warrant for this? What would happen if my, protagonist did this? How would that work, et cetera, et cetera?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And somebody, again, a mentor, came up to me and said, take a look and see what's going on here. I was writing books about how to buy a car. I was doing a post-apocalyptic fiction. They're like, "Why don't you write about what you know?" And I'm like, "That's a great idea." So I wrote 2 books in the Cops and Writers series. They're over my shoulder there on the top shelf. And they're geared for writers who want to write realistic police stories. So one is Cops and Writers from the Academy of the Street. And that's showing you how we're trained, what the equipment is, et cetera, et cetera. And the next one is investigations and crime scenes. And it's like, okay, you roll up on a homicide. Who does what? When does it happen? How fast does it happen? Et cetera, et cetera. So I developed a niche. And I was getting closer to retiring. And I'm like, oh, how can I promote this? So podcasts started really exploding. And I'm like, well, I'm going to try and get myself on as many podcasts as possible. And I'm going to start a Facebook group. All this is free. For the most part, it's time. That's all it is. And time is valuable. Don't get me wrong. But it's, for the most part, all this is free. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to get myself on some podcasts. And as I'm doing these podcasts, I'm like, you know what? Long time ago, back when I was in college, I DJ'd. And I'm like, I'm not like scared behind a microphone. I started college as a music major. I love music and I like being behind a mic. And I'm like, I could do this. So I started my own podcast and I started my own Facebook group. And my Facebook group was me, my editor, and like 2 or 3 friends. And now there's like 7,500 people literally from all over the world. Yeah. And it's just exploded. And we're dedicated more or less to answering people's police questions. It's almost all writers that ask. I've got law enforcement, state, local, federal, you name it, I've got it. And like I said, now it's all over the world. So it's really cool. And then I've got that Facebook group and then the podcast, and the podcast blew up. I never expected anybody really to listen. I thought it was just going to be kind of a self-advertising thing. And I'm like, it turned out the exact opposite. Yes, there are benefits to having your own podcast. When, I have a book release coming out on Friday, I can push that with my podcast. But I'm a huge fan of Gary V or Gary Vaynerchuk. It's like jab, 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 hook. So, give, ask. So it doesn't feel so spammy. If you're of service and you're helping people all the time, when you have that 1 or 2 asks, it doesn't seem so bad. And I've already got great reviews on this book that I'm releasing, and it's not even out yet. I sent out some ARC copies, some advanced reader copies, and people will be your cheerleader. If you are of service and you're giving them something substantial, it's shocking to me how much people literally go out of their way to promote you without you saying a word. It's great.
Yeah. Once again, you listen to Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Patrick O'Donnell. You go to his website. His website is copsandwriters.com. I mean, we wanted to tape a little bit when you decided to retire. That's a transition where it's like, all right, something that you've been doing for years, all of a sudden it's time to hang that coat up and trying to, start your next journey on your next chapter. What was it like to go full time into the podcast world and writing? And what was some of the things that you learned on the force that has allowed you to create this massive platform that you now have for your amazing community?
I think a big part of it is discipline. Whenever you have it, if you want to be good as a cop, discipline is key. And that's discipline, doing the right thing, saying the right thing at the right time, keeping yourself in shape, making sure that, you're driving with due regard. We have a ton of rules as a cop, and it's very structured. When you retire, there's no structure. You get up when you feel like it, et cetera, et cetera. And that can be a dangerous thing. I put out a lot of content when I was working, I don't know, 50, 60 hours a week. And it didn't feel like it. And I was still going to the gym every day, but I'd wake up at 5:30 every morning, and I didn't go to bed till about 11 o'clock or midnight, somewhere in that ballpark. But I was really pumping out a lot of stuff, and I was getting a lot of stuff done on top of my job. Now you retire, it's like you're in a Porsche going 100 miles an hour. When you retire, it's like you slam on the brakes and you go down to zero. So the way to get around that is I still have structure. I still have my day, it's like, okay, in the morning I shovel through emails. I'm going through social media. Then by about 11 o'clock in the morning, okay, now it's time to start writing. If I have a deadline, I'm going to write till like 2, 3, 4 o'clock. And then, then it's off to the gym. Then it's family time. Then when everybody else goes to bed, then I'm going to work some more. So I think that discipline is drilled into your head. The first day in the academy, you're standing at attention. You have inspections. You can't have a little bit of lint on your uniform or you get written up, that kind of thing when you were brand new. And they drill that into your head. And I think that really helps you later on in life.
People who watch the show, they're always excited to learn from people like yourself, who's been able to not just live your career and live your passion, but to do it in such a way where it has worked out well for you. Because when you look at life, it's built by our choices, and they either build us up or they tear us down.
Yeah,
From
absolutely.
From your professional background, those who are watching you, what just generic advice would you give to someone who is about to retire, but they don't want to be bored? They want to stay active. They want to keep themselves busy. What are some of the things that you see work for yourself that could be working for someone who is about to retire?
You know what? Again, dig the well before you're thirsty. Again, I can't say that enough. Here's the deal. Most people know when they're going to retire.
Yeah.
Or they have a pretty decent idea. And most people don't really plan for it. You might plan for it financially, but you got to plan for it emotionally as well. Sitting around watching TV all day is not a plan. Or it's like, hey, you know what? My wife and I are going to go on this super awesome cruise or vacation. Great. More power to you. I hope you do it. But the vacation's going to end. And
Yeah.
you got to do something. You got to, whether that be, if you had a hobby, maybe expound on it. Maybe, going back to that be of service, volunteer somewhere. Volunteer like at a boxing gym or something. Yeah, I'm a big old meathead. I love working out. I love boxing. I love all that kind of stuff. It's like if you are helping others, the benefits and the rewards are incredible. They really are. So, you know what? You have time now. Maybe it's time that you watch a grandkid, one day out of the week or something like that. You're helping your kid out. There's all kinds of things you can do, but I'll say the worst thing you could do is have zero plan and just kind of sit around and hope things happen. That ain't a plan. So if you have this career and you're getting ready to retire, you get, like I said before, you know what? Depending on your age and your health, that's what you pick for next. I don't want to be an electrician or a plumber. They make decent money. It's a noble job. Somebody's got to do it. But, I'm 60 years old. I have horrible knees. I've got arthritis. Those guys work their butts off. I don't want to do that. So keep that in mind as well. And one of the biggest mistakes that I saw, especially cops, again, we're like a race car going 100 miles an hour, and then you hit a brick wall and you're going zero. So what I have seen And what I've, talked to other retirees was, you know what, you did this career for 25, 30 years or whatever it was, and you retire on Friday and you start a new career on Monday. You know what? Give yourself a little time to catch your breath. There's nothing wrong with waiting a couple of weeks or a month or a couple of months. I mean, you don't want it being indefinite, obviously, but if you're going to be doing something or you're going to start a new job, there's no urgency where you have to do it like the next day. Or, it's like, hey, the weekend's over. Now I'm going to start this whole new career. Give yourself a little bit of self care, and also you're going to have a plan. You better be flexible with it because we all know how life is. It'll throw you some curveballs. That's just the way it is. So roll with those changes, like REO Speedwagon used to say, and everything's going to work out for the best. It really will. But, be kind to yourself, be of service. And you know what? You might have thought, hey, this one job is going to be great. I can't wait after you retire. And maybe it isn't. Okay. There's tons of jobs out there. There's tons of things to do out there. So go out and do them.
Once again, been watching and listening to us on Refocused Radio, talking to our special guest, Patrick O'Donnell. Go to his website, copsandwriters.com. And we have to get you back on because we haven't even scratched the surface.
No, we haven't. I can talk to you all day.
I think next time we need to get into some cop stories and talk about how cops, police officers, and communities all around the country, this nation, can come together and kind of see each other eye to eye. So I would love to have you back on to get that kind of perspective as well. But once again, I want to say thank you for your time. If someone wants to support everything you're doing with your books, do you have any recent books that you plan on releasing in the future? And how can people continue to support you?
Yes, I'm releasing a brand new book called The Good Collar on Friday. We're taping this on Monday, the 13th of January. So it'll probably be out by the time this airs. So yeah, it's on Amazon for now, but it's going to be available Kindle, paperback, and hardback. And the elevator pitch, more or less, is if you're a fan of Dexter, you're going to love this book. Imagine if Dexter, John Wick, and the Equalizer kind of got together. It's vigilante justice where a police chaplain is Dexter.
Okay.
So it's a great story. I had so much fun writing it. I can't tell you. I feel real strong about this project. It's the best I've ever done. This is book number 10 for me, so I can't wait for it to get out into the wild.
But once again, I want to say thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.